Hi, everybody. Welcome to Mile High Sports and Mile High Sports Today. I'm Sean Drotar. The Denver Broncos get the win they needed. The long playoff drought is over, the longest that the NFL has seen from a team that won the Super Bowl. The Broncos have not been back since they ended up winning the Lombardi Trophy in Super Bowl 50 following the 2015 season, the longest run any Super Bowl champ has ever had until they get back to the playoffs. All that is over. They had the second longest playoff drought behind only the Jets. The Broncos for that is over. For the Jets, it's not. We told you that was going to happen. Well, someone told us that this was going to happen. Not only the Broncos making the playoffs, but winning 10 wins, which is what they did exactly. And that's why you get to catch him every week on the program. Cody Rourke is here to sit in, enjoy, and probably gloat just a little.
No, I'm not much of a gloating person. I did have.
This is what people say right before they start gloating. You know that.
Per sources. I would say, for me, it's good to take a victory lap every once in a while. But in this business, we're often more wrong than we are right. So anytime you have a chance to be right, take a little bit of a victory lap. Said it back in training camp with you. I said, hey, if Denver has a chance to be better in terms of quarterback play in just 2 games this season,
right,
they'll win 10 games. And certainly it played out. Denver's won 10 games. They're in the playoffs. And it's an awesome thing. More so out of just being excited about being right. There was something I saw with this team going back to OTA, Sean.
You did?
And the thing is, it's hard to quantify because there's certain things that could impact it in the regular season, like injuries or something like that, like a change in the lineup, like chemistry. But, just seeing how close this team was in OTAs, even when there's competition going on, even in training camp, watching how close-knit this team was and how not concerned they seemed with all the outside noise about, okay, they're going to win 5.5 games. Like, for me, I was thinking to myself, like, all right, like, these guys have a different level of focus. I didn't see with them the year before, even when Russell Wilson was in the building. And as much as I like Russell Wilson as a person, he's always been great to me, he just wasn't the guy to get it done for the Broncos. And certainly you saw some of the stuff that in this past week against Cincinnati from Russ, that's why Sean Payton and the Broncos moved on from him. And they went out and they got Bo Nix. And seeing Bo's level of maturity, that to me is something that stood on. I said, hey, this is a team that can win 10 games this year. And certainly they did just that.
Yeah, and obviously, like Deion Sanders up in Boulder, we keep receipts here too. And from back in training camp, when you and I sat in the tent just outside the practice field, this was Cody having an opportunity to tell you specifically about what he thought would happen.
If Denver is just maybe even in 2 games better with their quarterback play and efficiency, they will win 10 games this year, in my opinion. I don't see them being worse than what they were last year. So for me, I think a lot is riding on it. Is Bo going to maybe start right away? Maybe, maybe not. But then if Stidham gets to start, there's so much pressure on him on a weekly basis because the moment the offense sputters out or goes 3 and out, 2 times in a row, the fan base is going to get a little uneasy, right? And I don't know if Sean wants that. So I think even if it's close, it goes to Bo.
And I appreciate Cody cutting it off there without me going like 10. That's because I do remember saying something to that effect.
I do remember like, oh, wow.
Yeah, I was like, oh, that's kind of bold. But my concerns were at that span of time that the Broncos were counting on kind of and it turned out that way. They set a new team record for sacks, but they were counting on not necessarily what a lot of teams do, where you have a guy a Myles Garrett, those kind of players who go out and put up the big numbers and everyone else assists. The Broncos were kind of hoping to just have a bunch of guys get 7 or 8 sacks. They did better than that. We'll talk about that on the program, but that's what they were kind of hoping. And I hadn't seen that happen very often, and so I had questions. And I always have questions. I will use Sean Payton's exact quote, right? Confidence is demonstrated ability. And you don't see teams and some of the players on the Broncos make that big leap. And when you expect a bunch of players to make big leaps simultaneously, you're the Colorado Rockies, by and large, where you just assume everything is going to go right for you, sunshine and rainbows all the time, and it doesn't work out. But my main concern was about Sean Payton and Bo Nix. Not so much Nix. I love the pairing. Much like you, way before even the pre-draft process, when all the noise was going on about other people, I was sitting here in this program and saying they want Bo Nix. They will pick Bo Nix, even if they pick 2nd overall. They're going to pick Bo Nix. And all the noise about McCarthy, I said, forget it. They're not going to do that. Bo Nix is the fit because, again, in the NFL, so much of it is about fit. And we look not only at Nix, but look around the league. Look at Sam Darnold with the Vikings. Look at Jared Goff with the Lions in that epic matchup. These are guys that were cast-offs from their team. And here they are, with some of the best teams in the league. And that happens a lot. So it's fit. It's coach and quarterback. Prior to Bo Nix's start as the opener, and you and I were consistent, Bo Nix will start. Bo Nix will start day 1. Bo Nix will be the starter all year. We had never seen Sean Payton coach a rookie quarterback.
No.
He'd only started a rookie quarterback for one game in his entire coaching career. Ian Book, the third rounder out of Notre Dame, he started one game. It was a disaster. And that's the only time Sean Payton's ever coached a rookie quarterback. So again, by Payton's own definition, confidence is demonstrated ability. Payton had not demonstrated that ability, so he didn't have confidence in it. But I think the wonderful thing for Broncos fans is all of these questions got answered. This defense with only one first-round pick among its starters in Pat Surtain, who is now the likely defensive player of the year.
Yeah.
An extraordinary defense that performed with maybe a couple in the last month, some blips, but on the whole, a tremendous year defensively. And then Bo Nix, I think, exceeds every expectation. We went back and made picks in our in the magazine you see right above us there. We had our Knicks picks, you and I and Doug Ottewill and Dan Mormon and
unsolicited Knicks picks.
Yeah, and we did pretty good with most of those. You and I think, were the closest in general with it. You were a little aggressive on the picks when you said he'd throw 25 touchdowns to 4 picks.
Hey,
that one
I
seemed
just
a
based
little
that
out
off
there.
of what he did at college at Oregon.
Yeah, I said he'd throw 11 picks. He threw 12. He
Yeah.
beat us both on the interceptions. You were off by about 250 yards. I was amazingly off by 18 yards on the year. So we had a pretty good idea of what Knicks would do in this offense with the pairing. And to see it all come together, especially so spectacularly yesterday. And I know that, yes, they were playing against primarily back 13 starters sat for the Chiefs. The Chiefs did not care about that game. And they did not care about it for 2 reasons. First, and the main one, they don't want injuries to their key players, obviously. But the second one that is probably real, the NFL reseeds. Bills versus Bengals. The Chiefs kind of didn't want either one of those teams. The Bengals, the only team that Patrick Mahomes does not have a winning record against in his career. So they didn't want the Bengals either. They wanted to shut them out and they could kill 2 birds with 1 stone, and that's what they did. But they didn't roll over.
No.
The Broncos did what they were supposed to do. They came in ready to play in a game they needed to win, and that was shown from the get-go.
Yeah, no. Hey, look at me here. Very, very closely, folks. All right. For all you little people on Blue Sky, Twitter, Threads, crying, oh, the Chiefs, they just wanted to roll over just so the Bengals didn't have to get in. Here's the deal. When you have 1 loss on the season, you clinch the number 1 seed, and your goal is to ultimately win a Super Bowl.
And you've won back-to-back Super Bowls and played more football than anybody over the last 2 seasons.
You want to go back-to-back Super Bowls at this point. You rest your starters. I mean, that's the practice that most people do. They rest their starters. Look at the Buffalo Bills. They rested their starters against the New England Patriots. And, it's like, all right, hey, you got to go out there. And for the Broncos, it doesn't matter. Like they approach like, it doesn't matter if it's the starters, doesn't matter if it's the backups. Our goal here, we have to win to get to the playoffs.
That was an elimination game.
So people are mad like at that, like Denver did exactly what they should have done. But here's the thing. Like if Denver would have struggled against Carson Wentz and the Chiefs backups, you see the amount of narratives that would be created from that. Denver came out. Their mission was, we need to come out here, put the pedal to the metal from start to finish. They did just that. That's the mark of a team that I think is a good team. That's the mark of a team that is focused. And for what Bo Nix was able to do on Sunday, to go 26 of 29 passing, and at one point be 18 of 18 passing with 3 touchdowns, that's hard to do whether you're going against starters or backups. And we're not just talking about Bo just throwing off a couple of dump offs. We're talking Bo had some downfield shots, 2 to Cortland Sutton, 1 to Devon Vele. It was impressive what we saw from Bo and just how he played. He looked like he was in total command of it. And the Broncos took care of business the way that they should have. And they should have done that 2 weeks ago against Cincinnati and against the Chargers. But you know what? The only opportunity they had to do it was week 18 against the Chiefs. So if you're mad about that, if you're a Bengals fan, you're crying, and you need to mop up all your tears, you should have beat the New England Patriots week 1. I couldn't even complain about it. Like, I would have won $60,000 if the Bengals would have done that, because I would have had a perfect 15 parlay pick. Parlay, go green. So Cincinnati, you want to cry about that? That's karma. Enjoy it. And you know what? Like, the Bengals are very, very good. The Broncos are going to play them here in Denver next season because of 3rd place finish. They got some tough decisions coming up, but you wasted Joe Burrow, an amazing season by him. And obviously it was
wasted.
They moved on from their defensive coordinator here today. But I think the biggest thing is Denver deserves to be in the playoffs. You may have wanted to see Cincinnati, but Cincinnati should have won. Plain and simple.
Yeah, they had opportunities to win. Obviously, they played in a very tough division, but the AFC West, every team but the Raiders,
in the playoffs.
3 teams. It was going to be either from the North, where the Bengals make it, or it was going to be from the West. It was going to have 3 teams make it. The Broncos are in, and they shut out the Chiefs for the first time since 2012. Backups, whatever you want. I mean, it's hard to shut out teams in the NFL. And to do that 38-0, you look at the 38-0 and you figure, man, must have been a disaster. The Chiefs, when you're looking at the the turnovers. They had none.
None.
They fumbled twice, but they recovered them both. Wentz didn't throw a pick. There were no turnovers in this game.
98 total yards of offense.
Yeah, and the Broncos scored on 7 of 9 drives with Nix at the helm. So, I mean, you got everything you wanted. You talked about the receivers, 4 different receivers, Sutton, Mims, Vele, and Javonte Williams, with receptions of 25 yards or further.
Yeah.
So a little bit more of the deep game coming into play for Cortland Sutton, especially impactful. If you were listening to Nate and I on Friday when we said the very best bet in all of football, it was we went to our friends at FanDuel. They sold Cortland Sutton at an over of 76 yards. We knew he needed 82 to get $2 million. And both Nate and I were like, you can
smash the over
for entertainment purposes only. I get it. You
Knowing
know,
what
don't
we know
put the
about
farm,
Sean
but
Payton, Sean loves to get his players incentives. Like we even went back a couple years ago at Radio Row Super Bowl. Like
but I
Emmanuel
took my
Sanders was telling us about
my unit limit and threw that right out the window. I felt that was as safe as it got, and he got it by the first half. So an extra $2 million for Cortland Sutton. A good game there, 98 yards, and the touchdown is the focal point. But really exciting to see not only Vele, who's been consistent all year as a number 2 guy, really taking that Tim Patrick role, not only figuratively but literally. Tim Patrick turned out just fine. He's on the top seeded Lions and playing an important role there. But Vele continued to kind of chug things out. Marvin Mims in the last half of this season has finally developed into the threat the Broncos have wanted. They finally, and some of this is on Mims, some of this is on Nix, some of this is on Sean Payton, who could not figure this out last year with Russell Wilson, despite Wilson being a notorious deep ball guy. But now in the last 7 games, Mims has 6 receiving touchdowns on the year. They've all come in the last 7, 4 in the last 2. Obviously 2 yesterday. He's become a major part of the offense. The Broncos have figured out what to do with him. In Vele, you're just kind of trying to churn out first downs, possession, move the chains. Sutton is a little bit of a do everything, especially near the red zone. And Mims is now your legitimate deep threat now, and has done enough, I think, where teams are going to start respecting it. Mims and Vele, targeting those 2 guys. Knicks went 9 for 9 with 101 yards and 3 touchdowns. That is going to diversify your offense and keep people off of Cortland Sutton. If they could ever get a running game going, you're really onto something.
Yeah, look, and the key for the Broncos offense, and specifically for the wide receivers for Marvin Mims, what we have seen is it's what happens when you're patient with the development of a player, right? You know, ideally when you have a vision for a player, like when you look at what Marvin was able to do at Oklahoma, he averaged somewhere between like 19.5 or 21.5 yards per catch at Oklahoma. And it's like, all right, this guy's got speed. He's got the ability to do stuff, you know, when the ball's in his hands. We see how dynamic he is as a return guy. So how do you translate that over into the offensive side of the ball? Well, you know, last year you had Jerry Jeudy. So now Marvin's kind of playing that Jerry Jeudy role a little bit early on in the season. And it's like, well, he can't just be this guy who's just in this role, right? It's how can we diversify? Because it's also – you have to find success based on how defenses are playing your scheme as a whole, right? Obviously, Cortland Sutton, we know, is the top guy. So what we start to see from teams playing Cortland Sutton, you're seeing a lot more bump and run. You're seeing a lot more press coverage, outside leverage from the corners with the safety lurking over the top of wherever Cortland Sutton is. And so that's why it's good to be able to move guys around and move Cortland around. But now it's like, hey, we're going to put Marvin in the slot. We're going to put Marvin on the outside. We're going to motion Marvin. Oh, we're also going to put Marvin in the backfield because now often at times in today's NFL, or the 2 high shell, you're not necessarily seeing a lot of corner guys, guard guys, or even like you're not even seeing safeties normally guard running backs out of the backfield. When you're running man coverage, it's inside linebackers who have man coverage responsibility 9 times out of 10 on a tailback who's lined up in the backfield. So when you can get Marvin in that role there, that right there is where things have opened up for him. And certainly it's because of that. Now teams are starting to cheat. I think that they still have so much more potential here with this offense, not only just with guys like Marvin Mims, with Devon Vele. I even think still with Troy Franklin, there's some pieces that are developing. So Broncos country, be patient here with Troy. There are things that he's doing. Even we saw it in the Kansas City game. Just throw him some short stuff. It doesn't always have to be the deep ball for Troy. And I think that's something they tried to do with Marvin a little bit too much last year. Just try to get a guy like Troy Franklin the ball in space, short to intermediate. The deep stuff will come. Teams are scared of the speed there. But when you factor in Marvin and Troy at the same exact time, both guys with the legit speed that they have, the Broncos have pieces and ingredients on this offense that haven't been fully added into the mix quite yet to make the full-on recipe. That stuff will come. We've seen the patience and the development with Marvin Mims. Do the same thing here with Troy Franklin. The Broncos have a plan here, and those 2 guys are going to be a big part of it going forward in terms of playmaking, and it's going to open things up for Bo Nix even more. But to your point, as what you said, Sean, the run game has to be a consistent emphasis for them. They were able to chunk off some big runs yesterday, but overall, you take away what Bo Nix was able to do with his legs on the ground, 47 rushing yards on 7 attempts. the run game volume overall, yards per carry, it still wasn't good enough. And that's going to be a challenge this week in Buffalo. And look, we'll preview the game. We'll break down some of the key things all week long here on MHS Today. This is going to be a fun one. It's going to be a tough one, though, for Denver.
Obviously, it's going to be a very tough one. And what I liked with part of what Mims did yesterday is part of what Sean Payton did. They didn't run him. I get the idea that the Mims on the sweeps is kind of a fun idea. Of course, the Broncos tried that with Jerry Jeudy multiple times last year, and it felt like an automatic loss of 4 yards.
Pat Shurmur, was it Pat Shurmur that did it with Noah Fant, or
yes.
was that Rich Scangarello? I think it could have been both.
It could have been both. But in those first 4, just for this idea, right? It hasn't worked out. The first 4 carries for Marvin Mims, he got 34 yards in total.
Yeah.
The next 9, the most recent 9 prior to this game, 8 total yards.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that one people have sniffed out, and it was nice to see the Broncos not feel like they had to do it, but they've been doing it
We've been
to
seeing more
establish
motion,
to put Mims on the field, right?
Yeah.
And make them respect him. Now people are respecting him as purely a receiver, which is where you want to do it. You don't want to have to rely on the gimmicks. I think the Broncos early on were trying to use gimmicks to continue to get him on the field. Now they don't have to do that.
Well, and I also like now you even have this threat now. The defense is going to have to see, like, you can throw the ball to the flat to Marvin, and then Marvin could do damage after the catch with it. Like that's an element that's still developing here in this offense. And
same thing with Troy Franklin. Again, when you actually look at the 40 times Franklin, who's even bigger than Mims, when it came to the combine stuff or whatever that's worth,
he's tall and long
and basically the same speed.
Yeah.
So
I'm telling you, there's special ingredients.
Well, there have been 3 drops I could think of right off the bat from Franklin and Nix. 3 drops from Franklin, and I could think of 2 passes from Nix that overshot it.
Patriots game.
That probably would have been another 150 yards.
What game was that? The Ravens game.
Yes, would have been another 150 yards for Franklin probably. He was only 200 yards behind Devon Vele for the 3rd leading receiver on the team.
We're also talking about a couple missed opportunities where Bo Nix could have surpassed Justin Herbert essentially in passing touchdowns by a rookie quarterback. Like, here's the thing about Bo. Bo threw 29 this season. He surpassed Baker Mayfield for the 2nd most passing touchdowns by a rookie in NFL history. He was just 2 behind Justin Herbert, who had 31. Bo finishes the year, obviously, 29 touchdown passes, 4 rushing touchdowns, and 1 receiving touchdown. So for him, an impactful season. Like, and to all say this, after starting off 0 touchdowns, 4 interceptions, 0-2 after the first 2 weeks, the growth we've seen from Bo Nix has been special. That's why the Broncos believe, and he is their next franchise quarterback. They're going to build around him. I'm excited to see how it all formulates.
Yeah.
But hey, rookie season, rookie quarterback, you get to go to the playoffs, but you got to face Josh Allen. You got to face Von Miller. It's going to be a tough one, but hey, you never know. We've seen some crazier things in the NFL.
Yeah, Broncos have lost 4 road playoff games, although that has to go back a long way till 97 because they haven't had too many options and you've had this big break, but they will get a crack at it. And it feels very much as if, because Cody's prediction came true here and you got the 10 wins for the Broncos, that now it feels like gravy. And if the Broncos season does come to an end on Sunday, I think Broncos fans look at it and say, look, the arrow is pointing up. Everything has been successful. Most of your guys that are and the Broncos find themselves in a good spot financially, and 1 more year of Russell Wilson's dead cap, which will be smaller next year than it was this year. And you are
Look what
really
they're able to do
track.
this year with the most massive,
which is what happens when you have a rookie quarterback who can step in. The guy he replaced, Russell Wilson, was kind of the poster child about that back when the Seahawks won their Super Bowl over the Broncos in Super Bowl 48. We'll talk more about this. Of course, Troy Renck will join us in just a little bit.
We get fined for
we'll have a chance. Not here.
Guns.
Not here. No, you're good.
First down.
Yeah, Roger Goodell doesn't do anything with us, at least not yet. But that's Cody Rourke. He'll be with us stopping in every day this week as we get ready for the Broncos and the Bills playoffs. Thanks so much to Cody. Want to let you know, by the way, obviously we're talking a lot about the Broncos, but the other seasons are in motion. And many of you are subscribed to this podcast. We thank you for that and listening to the show on demand whenever it fits your schedule. That's the point, right? But we have plenty of other ones that you get a chance to listen to. Ryan Blackburn keeps you up to date on what's happening with the Nuggets and the Pickaxe and Roll podcast. Nikola Jokic going for another MVP, although the Nuggets need to get a little bit better. You'll want to keep on top of it with Ryan, and we have him here on the program every week as well. But check out Pickaxe and Roll. Arif Dean's always on the ice with the Colorado Avalanche. Check out Rinkside with Arif Dean. Avs doing some real interesting things. Look very good. They traded for their 2 goaltenders. Obviously, Scott Wedgwood will miss some time, but seems to have avoided the worst possible injury and surgery. And the Avs are coming on live of late. And you can get the latest on all of those and more on the Broncos podcast with Troy Renck. Our friend from the Denver Post is featured on the Mile High Sports Podcast Network, and we'll talk to him in a little bit. Just search Mile High Sports whenever you get your podcast. But as Cody rolls out, Nate Lundy comes in. Thanks for popping in, Nate. Obviously, for the Broncos, a huge win. The idea of the sort of the weight being lifted could have been shown by Bo Nix, who is a a rookie running an entire lap, high-fiving fans around the stadium after it was over. Nick's even said, I have to be in a little better shape next time. I didn't realize quite how long that lap was until he ran it, but worth it as the Broncos do what they're supposed to do. They come ready to play. They take a win they had to take. It became a win or go home game after the Bengals win, and the Broncos do exactly what you want to see a team do. They came out with purpose, especially after a few weeks of being wobbly, and blew the doors off of a Chiefs team that admittedly was missing 13 starters and didn't care. But 38-0, that's butt kicking.
Yeah. You know what's fun? Being wrong. That is fun. I sit here right now saying I have never been more thrilled to have been wrong. I said this team would win 5 games. I said that if you were betting at the beginning of the season, if you were hanging out at the end of August and you wanted to put some money on what this team was going to do, I told you to take the under on the 5.5 wins because I didn't see it. I certainly didn't see it in the road games, and I also believed they were going to be in trouble at home. And being wrong has never been more fun than it is right now. The vibe at the stadium yesterday was tremendous. The fans that stuck it out in the cold, despite the fact that it was a blowout, the fans that stayed to be able to enjoy that. The sheer number of Chiefs fans in the stadium yesterday was nauseating, but that's fine.
They were pretty quiet, pretty early.
Yeah, they were pretty quiet, but
so,
it's been a fun 4-month run to recognize that you and I were going to be wrong, Sean, about what we said when we were broadcasting at training camp. 5 months ago, and what we talked about are the expectations of this team. So, regardless of the breakdown of yesterday's game, which I think is very minimal given the matchup that was and the injuries and the people that weren't playing, I think it's much more about what's coming up this week. And that's why I'm really excited about the stuff that Cody was just talking about and what he's going to have up on the site and what's going to be here on the YouTube channel, including his game film studies and all that, and breaking down things like, Pat Surtain versus Amari Cooper, things like that we're going to be talking about for this upcoming week. But most importantly, son of a bitch, it's fun to be wrong.
It is really nice to see the Broncos back in there, and very surprising, I think, given the performance of Bo Nix, of Sean Payton, I think, who deserves a tremendous amount of credit. We've eaten quite a bit of crow about that this year. He definitely has his way of doing it, and he did something he's never done before. He's basically got a rookie quarterback ready to play and was extraordinarily successful in doing it. The Broncos defense, maybe as much as Nix looked very good, it really was the Broncos defense, I think, that impressed, because it was 38-0 and there weren't any turnovers.
Yeah.
I mean, there wasn't the thing that tipped it all to one side, one way or the other. The Broncos got to Carson Wentz 5 times. That sets a new record for them, for the Broncos, 63 in a season. When you think about the great Broncos teams over the year, the great defensive pairings over the year, the great numbers that a lot of these phenomenal Broncos teams have put up, they have never had a season in which they had 63 sacks. Now, obviously, they play 17 games now. They didn't throughout their history, but it's very, very impressive. Nick Bonito with 2 of those finishes third in the NFL behind only Hendrickson of the Bengals and Myles Garrett of the Browns. That's an immense number, given the fact that he was not getting starter level snaps for the first month of the year, roughly. And Jonathan Cooper gets a sack, which gets him to 10.5, ties him for 12th in the league. So you have 2 of the top dozen sack artists in the league. But it's also the first time the Broncos have had a pair of guys with 10 or more sacks since Von Miller, who the Broncos will be facing, and Brandley Chubb did it back in 2018. It's hard to get double-digit sacks, and to get it from 2 guys. Look, Miller was the number 2 pick in the draft. Chubb was a first rounder. Nick Bonito was a 2nd, and Jonathan Cooper was a 7th. The production that they've gotten out of that, and give a ton of credit to George Payton, who brought these guys in. Payton has done an excellent job of making sure that the players he's gotten, and this is where the tail end of John Elway's administration kind of fell apart. George Payton drafts guys that have a high floor. You can argue the ceiling, but they have a high floor. They can make your team and they can contribute, and they're looking for a certain kind of players. And I think for the Broncos, part of the reason it has paid off, with only Pat Surtain being a first rounder among starters on this defense, is the fact that they have gotten a style of player. They kind of know what the kind of players they want, the type of player, the people, and it's been extraordinarily successful. This kind of, for lack of a better term, really a no-name defense beyond Surtain. NFL fans around the league aren't really familiar with Bonito or Cooper or Zach Allen or John Franklin Myers. I mean, this is a team that's gotten it done all year long against a very tough AFC West. Two of the teams are in the playoffs ahead of the Broncos, and these numbers have been extraordinarily impressive. Congrats to Vance Joseph and his entire unit.
Yeah, and I think you got to give a lot of credit to VJ, because I think that, after the drubbing that happened last year in Miami, that the organization gave him the ability to make it his defense. And I think that he took that opportunity and he ran with it, and he turned it into something that's very good. I think that's the reason why he's going to get interviewed for head coaching jobs. The Jets are already out there as a story to interview him. So I think there's going to be more interest in him. I know Sean Payton addressed that yesterday, and from a media standpoint, but I think you got to give a lot of credit to not just to what Vance Joseph did, but to an organization that was willing to let him do it, and let him be the defensive guy and create what he wanted to create, because that's what allowed you to take a 7th rounder, a 5th rounder, a 6th rounder, all these different guys, and allow them to contribute, regardless of whether they were, your double-digit sack leaders like you just talked about. You just wound up with guys that could contribute. Mm-hmm. You wound up with guys that could play a particular role in what Vance Joseph wanted to do from a defensive standpoint. And I believe a big chunk of that was because he created a defensive identity. And I think that helped, for example, this past offseason and past draft, it helped George Payton know what to look for. Mm-hmm. Oh, here's what we're doing. Here, this is the skill set that my DC is telling me he needs.
Right.
And now I can work on what those guys are in the draft, those guys with a particular floor and perhaps a high ceiling. I know what I'm looking for now because I have seen what my defensive coordinator needs to accomplish his goals.
Yeah, and it's a harder thing to do than you think. I think when a lot of people look at the draft situation and say, okay, yeah, go out there and go find guys that can be stars, find guys that can be immediate impact players. Well, that's all well and good if you're drafting in the first round or two. But when you draft late, you're not going to get guys, for the most part, that are ready-built stars. That's why they've dropped in the draft. So you do have to look and say, okay, what is this person good at? They're probably good at a couple different things. What are they good at? What are they lacking at? If what we're going to do is take more advantage of the things that they're good at, and we're not going to put them in positions where the things they're lacking at are, that's fine. We'll start them off on a good foot. We'll try to coach them up. We'll do what we can. Some guys, maybe they'll never be fast enough. Maybe they'll never be big enough, or whatever that is. But if you know that they can rush with leverage, that they time a snap well, that they can read defenses or read the opposing offense, these are the kind of things that you can find in the later picks. And that's, I think, what the Broncos have done very well. And the fact that you have Joseph, you have George Payton, you have Sean Payton, the overturn of this roster in 2 off seasons has been immense. And some of it was shocking. I mean, I think when Justin Simmons was released, you can make the argument that was a bad move because you could have traded him and gotten something. But at the same time, the idea the Broncos defense would get better was almost laughable. And yet here we are.
Yeah. And I certainly didn't expect it. Now I'm a Justin Simmons guy. I like Justin.
I mean,
I like him as a player. I like him as a person. Right. So, I mean, I was biased in that sense. But I think even trying to look at it as objectively as I could, I thought, okay, well, you're going to take a step back in order to take a step forward. It was kind of what I thought. Okay, this is going to suck. And it's going to hurt them this season. And blah, 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 but I looked at this as like, okay, let's talk about 2025. Let's talk about 2026. Right. And that wound up not necessarily being the case, that they found some players that could step in and they found a defensive scheme that allowed them to not have to rely just solely on number 31 back there at center or at safety, and be able to have a defense that could perform the way that this one did this year. So again, I give credit to Vance Joseph. I give credit to George Payton for recognizing that they could do that. And yeah, does it suck because you didn't pull it off as a trade to get something back in return? Yes. But you also did right by somebody that deserved you to do right by.
Right.
And got him into a scenario in the NFC.
And with this season, in the regular season, at least in the rearview mirror, you look back as everything starts to make more sense. They can't make the trade for John Franklin Myers and absorb his salary unless they moved on from Justin Simmons. Well, Franklin Myers was one of the critical parts of this defense. Right. If you're around the Broncos, you realize in the locker room, he's one of the clear leaders, one of the veteran guys that young players look up to, not only on the defensive side of the ball. And he's been a big part of, as they used to say about Reggie Jackson, the straw that stirs the drink, right? So the performance there, the great performance by Zach Allen. Allen talked early in the season when he was having a good year about how important it was to have Franklin Myers on the line with him, a guy that he knew that could help him get in the right spots. It's valuable. And all these things, when you look at what is happening, it's kind of like, you're baking a cake and you have the ingredients and you're kind of baking it from scratch and you're hoping you have it right, but you don't really know until the end. And the Broncos have basically pushed more or less all the right buttons. They realized when Benito was starting to really take off, they realized this is for real, this is sustainable. We're going to trade Baron Browning, who's a free agent at the end of the year, because Jonathan Cooper has clearly carved out his spot. And for the Broncos, you actually like seeing that. Is Baron Browning a talented guy? Yeah, he is. Might have a very good career. But the Broncos on this defense especially have done what you hope. They basically rolled the ball out there and said every position except for where number 2 plays is up for grabs. We don't really care where you came from, how long you played in the league, where you were originally drafted, or if you were drafted at all. Go win a position. Go win a job. And there is an advantage to that for coaches, because when players understand that there's a complete meritocracy there, because it's not necessarily, oh, well, this is his guy or that guy, and I don't really have a spot for the job. When you are with an organization that will show you that if you go out and you're the best player, you're Nick Benito, and you're outplaying the guys ahead of you, they're going to reward you for that. They're going to give you that job. And for the Broncos, I think, especially Cody talked about it before you hear, Nate, the idea that there was a hunger and a focus in this locker room, almost a college atmosphere of nobody believes in us, right? And some of that comes about because of that mentality. We understand we're a bunch of guys that aren't blue chip first-round draft picks, but whoever goes and plays well gets the job. It does keep everybody, the second stringers, the special teamers, energized, because you talk in Broncos history and you talk about some of the bigger things. Terrell Davis in the American Bowl in Tokyo with a big special teams hit and ends up making the roster as a 6th-round pick out of Georgia. The rest is history. He's a Hall of Famer. Rod Smith, who probably should be a Hall of Famer, same thing. Gets his look out of Southwestern Missouri State, plays well on special teams, then comes up, gets his first chance, wins a game, catching a Hail Mary over Darrell Green in the end zone from John Elway. The rest for him is history. The Broncos have shown some of these great stories in their history as guys that have had a chance to earn a job. It wasn't penciled in, and they went and did it. And that part, I think, is part of what drives this Broncos team. The only person on this team, I think, of which something was given to them because it had to be given to them, probably belongs to Garrett Bowles, who, when he was drafted, the Broncos had no choice. They had to play him, and he's held on to the position ever since. Got a new deal. You can quibble and argue, but you can't argue about the fact he has been at least an available guy. He's been durable. He's missed very little time, and he is consistent, even in some of his inconsistencies.
Yeah.
And you can plan around that.
Yeah, you absolutely can. By the way, Danny, quick programming note. Troy is working on something for the Denver Post. He's going to join us at 12:45,
okay,
as opposed to here at 12:30. So just hang tight. Troy will be with us here in about 10 minutes, folks. He just messaged me that he's doing something for the Post. Yeah, you had guys that earned it. You get the undrafted idea. You get the lower draft pick, high ceiling, outperforming your draft position, right, is kind of what we look for. I mean, the obviously the perfect example of that is Tom Brady. So you want guys that can do that. But again, I keep coming back. Like, I want to give some credit to George Payton, but I want to give credit to Vance Joseph. I want to give credit to Sean Payton. I want to give credit to Bo Nix for finding a way to be able to get these guys involved and to make some stars out of guys that maybe we didn't necessarily expect.
Ownership for being okay with taking a massive dead cap hit, for paying Russell Wilson exponentially more to play for a team you know is in the playoffs.
Yeah, so
Broncos are paying more than the Steelers.
You know, there's a lot that I think there is to enjoy. And I also think, Sean, there's a lot that you can enjoy by looking around at, okay, the Broncos come in as the 7 seed, okay? And you got to go to Buffalo. And by the way, Broncos fans, kind of cheap to get in if you're thinking about flying to Buffalo and watching the game on Sunday. You'll be cold as hell, but we're all used to that. Look around at the rest of the AFC, or we can even talk about the NFC too if you want to, but let me start here on Saturday, Sean.
Yeah.
Okay. So the 2:30 game on Saturday is going to get us the Chargers and the Texans. I am not going to be surprised at all if Harbaugh and company go in and win this game.
Better record
Against Houston. Houston's hosting because they're the division winner. That's the only reason why.
Chargers are favored in that game. They've won more games.
Yeah. I think the Chargers have obviously they are favored, but I think they are legitimately an opportunity to win this game.
I agree.
Against Houston. But compare where the Broncos are to where Houston is, for example. Okay, so let's talk about C.J. Stroud for a second. A guy that a lot of us liked when he came into the draft and thought that he had the potential to be good. You just kind of had to see what kind of situation he went into. So much of it is determined by the team you go to, the coaching staff you have, and the players that wind up around you. What happens? He gets a guy like Nico Collins that he can throw the ball to. He gets a receiver he can rely on. Sound familiar? Of course it does. He's got a coach that was able to work with him and also have a defense that could help keep them in games when he was starting out, to make sure that it wasn't all on his shoulders. Sound familiar? Of course it does. So you look at that with Houston, and that's why the only challenge I suppose you could have right now, if you think about it from the Broncos standpoint, comparing it to the Texans, is the Texans are able to host this game because they're in a weak division.
Correct.
It's the only reason that it's taking place. Folks, it may be a while before the Broncos get into a position of being able to host in the playoffs. That's just par for the course in the fact that you're in a very difficult AFC West with the two teams that are also in it, with the Chargers and the Chiefs, and knowing that you're going to have to stare up at the Chiefs for a little while. That's just the way that it is. Okay. Hopefully it changes soon. My fingers are crossed. And from what I saw yesterday, I feel pretty good about it. But that's going to be the case for a while, that you may be the equivalent of the Chargers, who are favored and have a better record, and you're still having to go on the road for your first playoff game. That may just be something that we as Broncos fans have to get used to. But look at the similarities when it comes to the Texans, right?
Yep.
You came in, you had this young quarterback, you built some things around him, you had a defense. Like, there are some things that are pushing you forward. It's just too bad that the Broncos are not in a really crappy AFC South that they could have some fun with. But that's the case. Enough said.
It would help if you could find a running back that can get you double-digit touchdowns, like Joe Mixon. Maybe that's the next thing.
But maybe that's part of it. Maybe that's part of it. But Houston has managed to do it, in my opinion, without a stellar tight end. Also something that's very familiar to all of us. We're going to talk about a bunch of this week as we break down some of these playoff games outside of just what's going to happen at Orchard Park. But now let me go to the evening game.
Mm-hmm.
All right. It's the other AFC. We're talking about Pittsburgh and Baltimore.
Ooh.
Baltimore, a double-digit favorite
in the playoffs
for a reason. And I think they probably win it by double figures. When you go up against this Pittsburgh team, Pittsburgh, a lot of it is their coaching. A lot of it is their coaching. It is the consistency of Mike Tomlin. It is the consistency of that organization. They are known for it across the NFL. Those of you that are really deep NFL fans know that. That's one of the things that the Steelers organization is known for, is consistency. Baltimore has the MVP. I think it really is. I know everybody's arguing about it on all the talking head shows about whether it's Josh Allen or Lamar Jackson. I think you could give it to either one, and I wouldn't argue with you.
I wouldn't even argue, quite frankly. I know it doesn't happen often. It's an Ernie Banks type of situation, but I think you could make the argument for Joe Burrow, too. I think you could make the argument for Jared Goff. You could make the argument for Saquon Barkley. You can make the argument for Saquon Barkley.
I mean, this is one of those years where I don't necessarily feel like there is one that you just go, man, you're an idiot if you don't vote for this guy.
Right. And nobody's, somebody's going to get quote unquote robbed, but
somebody's going to get
really
snubbed.
Because everybody understands, like, you could make an argument for any of these guys. There's some top end talent. But
so
the
look
Steelers
at
are moving in the. Talk about two teams hitting in the playoffs. We talk about peaking at the right time.
Yes.
The Steelers
they're going the wrong way.
The wagon is rolling downhill near a cliff, on fire.
Well, I don't know if it's necessarily on fire, but I'll tell you that a few spokes of the wagon wheel are missing.
Yeah, it's not good.
It's just it's that. So these two teams are going in opposite directions. I think it's going to make it for. I got to be honest. I think it'll be a somewhat boring game on Saturday night. I don't think it's going to be one that's going to keep our attention there on Amazon Prime for too long. I do think the afternoon game is highly intriguing. I am really excited about this matchup between the Chargers and the Texans. I just think that's going to be a really, really, really fun game on Saturday. I love that game on the schedule. And the same thing on Sunday, like outside of our Broncos game that we'll obviously be rooting for and watching and watching intently. That matchup between Green Bay and Philly is going to be a ton of fun, folks.
Green Bay is 11-6 and they're the 7th seed.
I know, it's nuts.
And obviously they're going to need Jalen Hurts back from concussion protocol, but the presumption is that he will. And I think you have to favor the Eagles, but we've seen the Packers with Jordan Love surprise here and there. A little bit of concern, the injury at the tail end of that game. And obviously, it's a game you had to play to get in, but I agree with you. I think the Packers have more than just a puncher's chance to win that game.
Sure. I think they absolutely do. I think Jordan Love's a great look. Green Bay outside of the Lions. Green Bay was my Super Bowl pick in August to be able to make it. I thought the Lions had a good chance, but Green Bay was the team that I leaned into because I think we saw a lot last year in the playoffs out of Jordan Love, and I expected him to continue to get better. They obviously not having him there for a little while in the season cost them. That's why they are the 7 seed despite having such a great record.
In that ridiculous division, obviously,
Well,
that we
you know,
got
10 wins.
settled last night.
Yeah, 10 wins, 10 wins. I mean, look, it's what the Broncos are dealing with. 10 wins and you're the 7 seed. So I think you're talking about some similarities here, but that's why I wanted to look around, and we'll do a lot more of this later in the week.
Yeah.
Okay. But I wanted to look around this idea of what else was happening in these playoff matchups, and in particular in Wild Card Weekend, and where the similarities exist in what we're watching in Denver. And like I said, I think that for me right now, I think the one that gets the majority of my attention, if you will, is the what we see with the Texans. I think there are some I think there are some parallels between what Houston has been able to do in that division and with their quarterback and with their young talented team, and what we are starting to see some traction with Denver. Now I think it's going to kind of go this way, because I think the Broncos are going to continue to have a good defense. I think Houston needs to shore up that defense, not having some of the talent that they've had historically there. But I think there's some similarities there with what they've been able to do offensively.
Yeah, I think that's actually a pretty good comparison, Nate. It's a good point, because you're kind of looking for teams that fit the pattern that can be successful.
Sure.
And the Texans got jump started when they landed CJ Stroud.
Yes.
And he looked absolutely ready to go. And then the rest of it starts to fall into place. And for the Broncos, that the AFC landscape is tricky. I get that. It's kind of mushy in the middle. There's a lot of teams. I mean, the Bengals, barely getting over 500, and they're in it until the very last day of the season. So it's a big soft middle, and then there's a lot of bad teams. So it's kind of one of those weird teams. The bell curve is very, very narrow, and the Broncos are in it. But as you pointed out from the beginning of this segment, Nate, but they're in it ahead of schedule, vastly ahead of schedule,
right.
With taking the biggest dead cap hit in the history of the league and still being able to find a way to cobble together 10 wins. That's absolutely remarkable. And yes, maybe it comes to an end on Sunday, but for the Broncos fans that have been waiting forever to see, not only just get back to the playoffs, but get back to the playoffs with a plan to go back year after year after year. Now you look at the way the Broncos are assembled. You have your quarterback, that. You have your coach, that. Most of your young players are on longer term deals already. They paid Pat Surtain. They paid Quinn Miners. Jonathan Cooper got his. Nick Bonito will get his in the offseason. And then most of your guys are set. They have to figure out what they're going to want to do with Cortland Sutton sooner rather than later. But for the most part, you look at their young players and they're already on the team for long term. So you have all the answers here already. Now you're in a spot where they need a little more experience, get a little more mature, and you add a couple pieces here and there. You can maybe get a tight end, maybe work on running back. There's a couple things you can do. But everything looks like it's pointed in the right direction, not just for this to be a blip, but for the Broncos to be in the playoff mix year after year, even if the Chiefs and the Chargers remain where they're at.
Yeah, continue to be
exactly
where they're at. And, we got a game on Sunday to be worried about. But one of the things that I immediately looked at this morning, the 2025 opponents,
right,
which have been announced because it's done. You have the interconference that happens. But you also have your opponents get determined by where you finish within your division,
right,
and then where everybody else finishes within the division. The home games for next year, outside of the AFC West, the Cowboys will be here, the Jags will be here, the Giants will be here.
Some bad football teams.
The Tennessee Titans will be here.
Really bad football teams.
The Cincinnati Bengals will be here.
Yeah, they're dangerous. We know
and the aforementioned Green Bay Packers will be here. The two intra-conferences for them is the AFC South, so that's nice. You get Tennessee, you get Indy, you get Jacksonville, you get Houston. The NFC is the NFC East. So you will have Philly and Washington. Those dangerous. Two, Philly and Washington will both be on the road. As I mentioned, the Cowboys and the Giants will be here. Indy and Houston are the two on the road when it comes to the AFC South. But then the other one on the road will be the Jets, who will likely not have Aaron Rodgers, in my opinion. So next year is kind of fun. It's the year where there are 9 home regular season games and only 1 home preseason game. So that's always nice. You get the advantage of the 9 home games. And then the 8 on the road. I mean, I couldn't help but starting to look at that. Like, all right, now who do we get to enjoy next year?
And the fact the Broncos did, because that was one of the reasons that
I was excited about this, because I wanted to be able to get excited about who, I was like, yesterday was fun, man. 38-0.
Yeah,
that's fun.
What's next? It'll be interesting to see too, because the point you're making is interesting, and it was one of the reasons that you and I thought that the Broncos would end up with the under, in part because They're young, and they had the extra road game.
They had an extra road
not
game.
the
That's
home
why I
game.
thought it was going to one of the main reasons I thought they were going to stay under that 5.5 number was because this was the season that they had 9 on the road.
Yeah. And so that option
Working
will go away.
against
So, I
them.
mean, everything is really going the Broncos' way here. It's just a matter of if you can, surprise everybody. And it's not a bad place to be in. You're going into Buffalo in January. You're going to have to take on a team that a lot of people feel may very well win the Super Bowl, that has a guy that I think will win the MVP. I would also give it to Lamar Jackson myself, but I have no problem with Josh Allen winning it. And I think Josh Allen will win it. I think that because he doesn't, have one, and Lamar's got 2. But and you're also playing against a guy in Josh Allen who actually has a personal axe to grind against the Denver Broncos. Now, sometimes that can be an advantage because if you're getting emotional about something because it matters to you a little bit too much, and maybe it shouldn't, it just isn't the team in front of you, but this is the team that stiffed him, that wouldn't even send anybody to his pro day up in Laramie. And so in the end, the Broncos get to walk into this, almost double-digit underdogs. They're 9-point underdogs right now. No one expects them to win. It plays right into what Sean Payton's been doing all year. No one expects us to do anything. And you know what? If we get steamrolled by the Bills, no one's going to care. No one's going to go, oh, wow, what an embarrassing performance by the Broncos. They're not going to talk about it. So you can go in there, you can play free, you can play loose, you can take your chances. The Bills have everything to lose. You have nothing to lose. And so for the Broncos, I'm not saying they're going to win this game. I don't think they will. I'm not even sure they can keep it close. But I do know that it is liberating when you're in a playoff scenario to be able to say, hey, let's just go with it. Let's just let it go. No one's expecting us. We saw the Lions almost get to the Super Bowl last year because even in the NFC Championship, that was the vibe, right? It's the Niners. They have everybody. They're stacked.
Mm-hmm.
They got the coaches. They got the experience. They got all the guys. And Detroit almost beat them. Now, of course, Detroit's in a different spot. Now they're the hunted rather than the hunter. But for the Broncos right now, they get to be the hunter. And it doesn't set them back a bit if they lose, because the one thing in every sport, and it matters as much in the NFL as others because the seasons are short. For a long time ago, I talked about baseball playoffs, and I talked with players about baseball playoffs. They basically said that every game you play in the postseason in baseball, you learn about the same as you learn in about 2 to 3 weeks of regular season baseball. So for young players, it's immensely valuable. Basketball, they say the same. You can be in for one series, and it was basically like having a month or more of experience. The Broncos do need the experience in the playoffs. They need to experience what it's like, the intensity, the fact that the refs let them play a little bit more. The crowd's going to be a little more intense. They have to experience it, and they probably have to lose it in order to learn what they have to do to win it. And so for the Broncos, again, no matter how this turns out, it's still going to help them. Even if they get boat raced, it still helps them along the track. Everything is going for the Broncos in exactly the way you'd hope. That arrow is not creeping up. It's now 45 degrees. It's basically straight up.
Yeah. The opportunity for them to grow is always benefited by having that postseason play. And you're right. It's true across all sports. I think it is more true in some other sports a bit than it is in the NFL.
I would agree with that.
But I do think that it benefits a lot, and it benefits guys like Bo.
But you don't miss the playoffs for 8 years and then just go to the Super Bowl. It just doesn't work that way.
No, and you also don't find success in the postseason and have that guarantee you that you're going to turn around and have that success again. See Cincinnati. So just because you get that experience and you get that for some of your young players doesn't necessarily mean that that's going to turn around and get you right back, because obviously you don't play these games in a vacuum. These other teams are trying to improve and come after you. And look, Cincinnati, I think part of the reason why Bengals fans can be frustrated and, in recognition of them not making the postseason, one, it's because you recognize that there's a certain window that exists of postseason opportunities for you. But I think the other one, talking about similarities between the Broncos and some of the other teams, I think it exists with Cincinnati. Cincinnati's in a really, really effing hard division, people.
It is stacked.
They are stacked in that division. And if it weren't for the fact that the Browns are just run like a clown show.
But remember, they made the playoffs last year and were dangerous. They still have Myles Garrett. They have talent.
Yes.
Jerry Jeudy had a great year.
But it's a clown car. Being driven by a drunk clown.
Yeah, that's an owner. More than
yes.
There are a few teams in which it's an ownership problem. The Jets are one.
The Jets have an ownership problem.
The Browns are another one. Quite frankly, the Cowboys another one. Not the fact that they're going to go under anything, but that's another team that's got an ownership problem. And I get it for Cincinnati fans, because that's a team that if they could have snuck in the playoffs, And you'd say, could they beat the Bills?
Yes.
Yes. Could they go into KC after that and beat the Chiefs? Again,
Yes.
yes. So I get it that you could even sneak in and maybe win the whole thing. Joe Burrow early in his career said, when is your window? And he said, my whole career. And that may very well be the case as long as he can stay healthy. But you started 1-4. I mean, that's the way it goes. You started 4-8. I mean, congratulations on finishing on a 5-game run, but you were 4-8. And quite frankly, I think for Bengals fans, I get the frustration because it does feel like if you get into the dance and you get a little lucky, you could make some noise. But for Bengals fans, I think Lou Anarumo's being scapegoated a little bit, but that does happen when you have bad teams and teams fail in their situation. But if I'm a Bengals fan and I look at it, this team at 4-8 could have easily packed it in. They go ahead and they win their last 5 and they miss on a tiebreaker. But I'm looking at the Bengals and I'm not thinking, oh, that was their one chance or, oh, they're going to fade. I look at it and say the way they finished tells me they still have the right coaching staff, a lot of the right personnel. They need a little luckier with the injury situation, and they're going to be right back in the mix next year too.
Yeah, there's nothing. I don't think there's anything for Bengals fans to be able to sit back and say, oh, well, we're screwed.
Yes, bad. Unfortunately, bad start
sucks.
doomed you.
It sucks. I mean, when you're in that kind of a division, a slow start burns you.
Mm-hmm.
It just does. So, I think unfortunately they were victims to that, and they're victims to the tiebreaker and all those kinds of things. But you're exactly right. It would have been very easy for that organization to say, hey, do we have an asset that we can get rid of at the trade deadline that's going to get us something that's going to help us? And they didn't do that.
It's not happening. Let's finish with like 6 wins, pick in the top 10, and then we'll really bounce back quick.
They could have very, very easily done that.
Yeah. Burrow and Chase are not the guys
and
that
they
pack it in. So.
and they didn't. So I will say this. We were just talking about the AFC, Sean. Let's go over. I talked about how much I'm looking forward to the Green Bay Philadelphia game on Sunday afternoon. That one's at 2:30. That one will be on Fox. Looking at the NFC, which is, if you look at the schedule for this weekend, the first 3 games are the AFC, the last 3 games are the NFC. That's how it just stacks up for the schedule this weekend. Wouldn't be surprised at all for Green Bay to win that game. Now, not having Christian Watson is going to hurt him. It is not confirmed as of yet, but the expectation is that he tore his ACL.
I would be surprised if the Packers won it, but it wouldn't be a stunner because we've seen the Eagles at times look very vulnerable. We've seen the Packers at times look really good. I think for a 7 versus a 2, the Packers winning would be far more likely and less of a surprise than say the Broncos going in and toppling the Bills.
But I think the other reason that I put that out there is there's a lot of chatter about Nick Sirianni is under the microscope.
Yes, he is.
There's a lot of chatter in Philadelphia about whether or not, and I've seen this across the sports radio conversations. I've seen it in the blogs. I've seen it. There's a lot of people in Philadelphia that would like to see them make a change at head coach, that they believe that this team is underperforming, and there's a lot of people that want to point the finger at Sirianni as being the reason why. And so this, to me, might be a bit of a cat and mouse game based on the coaches in this one. Could Green Bay come in and could he out-coach him? Yeah, he might be able to. He really might.
Sure.
Then you get into the evening. I think Washington and Tampa is a ton of fun down there at Raymond James.
Yep. Yeah,
Can Jaden Daniels keep it going as the rookie quarterback? Can he go in, win a road game, do it against Baker, who's going to be out there just like, winging it the way Baker does? That to me is going to be a fun Sunday night game. And then obviously we go into Monday night and you've got the Rams and you've got Minnesota. So like in total, I know it's playoffs and therefore there's all kinds of intrigue. I'm really excited about that Green Bay game. I think it sucks that Christian Watson got hurt in their game yesterday against the Bears for Green Bay, because he is a great receiver for them. And I think that Jordan Love and company will miss him not being out there on the field. But I mean, what a stacked schedule for this weekend. And I guess this is why the NFL's king, right? And I would have expected nothing less. And I know Baltimore's favored by 10.
Right.
But even that game has some intrigue to it.
The Steelers have enough guys that can wreck your game.
Yeah.
If
you mean
Watt and Hayward,
TJ,
Watch and Hayward go off and do things. I mean,
I could totally see that.
The point you make of Philly is fascinating because I couldn't help but think about this, and I'm like, okay, I will say this, Eagles fans, careful what you wish for.
Yes.
Nick Sirianni in his 4 years is 48-20. That's a 71% winning percentage. In his last 3 years, he's 39-12. And I got it. You haven't gotten to the Super Bowl and you've gotten the NFC Championship once. At one point in time, the things that we're talking about, yeah, great regular season record, but haven't gotten to the Super Bowl. We just need a new voice. The last time that happened to the Eagles, they did that to Andy Reid.
Yes.
Andy Reid seems like it wasn't a problem with the coaching.
Yeah.
And I guess I would caution when you're talking about a guy that's gone 39-12 in the last 3 years and had to create an offense to work around Jalen Hurts, who was a mid-round pick that a lot of people thought might not even make it in the NFL.
Right.
Just careful what you wish for sometimes. You know what I mean? The grass is not always greener on the other side. Andy Reid is the only coach that is the winningest head coach for 2 franchises.
Yeah.
Ever. I mean,
well, and it comes back. Look, there must be something in Pennsylvania, because it comes back. I mean, the same thing happens with Steelers fans. They're all, we're tired of Mike Tomlin.
Yeah.
We can't get. I mean, what the hell?
About 29 other teams every year that would scoop him up before his bags got into his car.
Yeah, I mean, it's silly, but I also get it. I also understand, because so much of it is built around the idea that fans need someone to point a finger at.
Right.
It's just what they do. Everybody wants to blame one thing.
Yeah, like it's
right?
one thing that causes
It's always
the problem.
one
It's
thing.
a lot more complicated than that.
It's always one. It's like, well, yeah. I mean, it's not like we're investigating an arson,
right,
where you can determine exactly where the fire started, right? I mean, it's not the same, people.
Denver, people look at Russell Wilson. See, we moved on from Russell Wilson, and you got Bo Nixon. Russell Wilson was the problem. Was he? Isn't he the quarterback of a team that's higher seeded than the Broncos, that was in a tougher division? I mean, really?
Yeah.
In this case, it was about fit, and also about the way the salary works out. So it's more complicated than that, and it can be more complicated than that. And I think it's very easy to find a way where you look at some of these things and say, oh, it's just the one thing. And you make a mistake with that, thinking it's just the one thing. And it takes a long time to put it all back together. And it goes back to what we're talking about with the Broncos, where ownership, the general manager, the head coach, the quarterback, they're all aligned. They're all aligned. We're not hearing any of the there's pushback on this level or that level. You go from the ownership to the field, and it's a straight line. Everyone's on the same page. I think there was some reason to fairly doubt Sean Payton a year ago when he talked about George Payton's security in that role, but he was consistent and said, no, I get the same vibe I got with Mickey Loomis, who we worked with for a long time with the Saints. And the truth of the matter is, actually, it looks very much like that is working. And it looks like Sean Payton or Vance Joseph or whomever can come to George Payton and say, this is what I'm looking for. And Payton will say, cool, I'll go find that for you. And he'll work in lockstep with Sean Payton and do it. But it does require patience. And even when you're the Eagles and you're 39-12 in the last few years, it requires patience. How the 49ers worked out. Their window might have closed.
Yes. What
did they accomplish? Right. But does that mean you get everybody out of the way? Sometimes this happens. And had the Bengals finished it in a worse fashion, maybe they're replacing Zach Taylor. And I think that would be a mistake. And I think even situations with the Browns, for example, Kevin Stefanski is a 2-time coach of the year. You might not have known that. And it's understandable if you don't. But the Browns look at it, and to their ownership is a mess. But to their credit, there hasn't been a lot of word about we're going to get rid of Stefanski necessarily. Yes, during the end part of the season, because you have to recognize what the actual problems are.
Right.
And you made a mistake when you traded for Deshaun Watson, and you made a mistake when you gave him a fully guaranteed contract, and he's about to up Russell Wilson's dead cap money. That'll be the biggest one in history. And it's important to value that, because as the Broncos, whenever the offseason comes, and it will come earlier than Broncos fans want, it always does. But patience is really important. It is hard to get over the top. It is so incredibly hard. Look at the run the Bills have been on the last few years. Look at the run the Ravens have been on in the last couple of years. Look at the run that the Niners have been on the last couple of years. It is extraordinarily hard to go through the top teams of the NFL in one game, not series where it's 7 games, in one game, and make sure you hit all your marks. It is very, very difficult. And when you're on the right track, and the Broncos have gotten into the playoffs, they have 10 wins. I think they're at the early part of that. But yes, it's important to know that when there are hiccups along the way, it's always more than one thing.
Yeah. Well, it's never, you can point the finger all you want. I think it's dumb when people try to do it, because it's always a multitude of things.
It's not golf.
Well, but it's also, but look, it's what talk radio, and it's what the social media, it's what it's all, built things up to. But fans have been this way forever, long before
There's
we were
always
dealing.
a magic bullet, right? Just fix the one thing. And
everybody's convinced that it is just one thing, and oh well, it'll be fine because you fixed the one thing. Well, it's never just one thing. So I look forward to having the discussions as we go throughout the rest of the week to be able to look not only at this matchup in Buffalo, but also at the rest of the playoff picture. Yes, I will have, of course, betting content for you guys as we get into Thursday and Friday of this week. We will talk about some of the things that have already jumped out at me. By the way, you talked about the spread in the Broncos game. It opened at 7.5. It's already up to 9.5. So people are steaming the money right now on the Bills, and everything is moving in that particular direction. And as of this morning, I think 80-something% of the money, by the way, was on the over in the game. The early money that came in with our friends at BetMGM was on the over in that contest. It is expected to be cold, but as of right now, the weather forecast is not terrible other than it being cold. We're not looking at a blizzard like we have seen before where they've got to recruit the fans to come out and shovel the snow. So that's where we stand right now. We'll look more and more at it as we go forward. But I'm going to let you close out the program with our good friend Troy Renck.
Thanks, Nate. Appreciate it. As we talked about before, Troy Renck of the Denver Post joins us, the host of the Broncos podcast with Troy Renck. Hopefully you caught that. And if you haven't, you can still subscribe to it anytime you would like. We're very proud it's part of the Mile High Sports Network. Troy, we'll get into the matchup in just a little bit, specifically what you need to do to play in Buffalo on January. But in this case, I think it's more a shocking season. Cody Rourke came in for the show. He had actually predicted at the beginning of the year that the Broncos would win 10 games. Nate didn't. You didn't. I didn't. And obviously it was a very, very surprising and a positively surprising season. Looking back at it now, and I know it's only barely in the rearview mirror, what did we miss? What was unexpected that launched the Broncos so quickly ahead of schedule?
Well, I mean, again, a lot of people that pick 10 wins also pick 10 wins for the last 7-8 years, and we're equally wrong. Not necessarily Cody, but I mean, part of the pessimism around my pick of 6 wins was basically the youth of the roster, Sean Payton never coaching a rookie quarterback, and him having to change how he dealt with young players. What did we miss? Obviously, I thought Bo would be 3,200 yards, 20 touchdowns, 10 picks. Good, but there'd still be some lingering questions where you could let strain and say, yes, he's the guy, but some questions. He has knocked it out of the park. So that's number one. He's exceeded expectations along with his team. Number two, you always have surprise players when you have a surprise season. Nick Bonito was just borderline a guy, and now he was in the conversation of Defensive Player of the Year for the second half of the season. That is the type of stuff that has to happen if you're going to have a special season. Pat Surtain taking his game to the next level. It's always been great. He's probably going to win Defensive Player of the Year. And then let's not get lost in the fact that Cortland Sutton has played as well as he's played since 2019. But the defense was a weak spot last year, the defense. So as much as the offense grew and still lacked skilled players, what did we miss? I thought the defense would be improved. I didn't think they would be like a top 5 defense. I knew they'd be better against the run. But the additions of John Franklin Myers and Malcolm Roach brought out the best in DJ Jones and Zach Allen, and Bonito. And Brandon Jones. I love Justin Simmons. Brandon Jones fits this defense way better than Justin Simmons did. So what did we miss? It's just like in baseball when you look at a roster, 25 guys, and 7 or 8 or up to 10 have career years. This is what happens. Typically, when you forecast that, it never happens because of injuries or ineffectiveness. So we missed, and partly because of my own pessimism of covering the last, since 2000, I've covered it since 2014, covering these last years since 2016, there is a gravitational pull to feel like they're going to mess something up. They're young, they're naive in wonderful ways. Their quarterback exceeded expectations, and they have, several 4 to 5 guys have clear career years that turned what we thought was going to be an improved defense into one of the league's best. That would have been a forecast before the season for a defense that was among the worst against the run to say a year later they're going to be among the best against the run and get 63 sacks. Like, come on, I thought they'd get 45, like legitimately 45, flirt with 50. So good on them. I mean, they did it. And this stupid narrative that they somehow don't deserve to be in the playoffs, give me a break, Sean. It's not their fault the Bengals lost to the Patriots. It's not their fault the Dolphins can't play in cold weather. It's not their fault that the Jets hitched their wagon to a washed-up Aaron Rodgers. Broncos beat bad teams. There's a skill in that. They beat Baker Mayfield. They beat Aaron Rodgers. They won 10 games. They don't have to apologize for that. Give me a break.
Yeah, I find that narrative a little strange anyway. I mean, the records are what they are. The tiebreakers are what they are. They're there for a reason. And that's the way it went. The Broncos didn't start 4-8 and have to work their way back. They found themselves in the mix the whole way through. I'm just going to, I've generally been trying to keep this super positive, but you brought up the same thing. I brought that up earlier. In fact, I even referred to baseball, same thing, how the Colorado Rockies have a tendency of assuming that 6 of their players will all have career years this year and then they'll be good. That rarely works. Part of the problem, though, if you're right, and 4 or 5 of their significant players all had career years, that doesn't happen every year. When you go into next season and you build onto this, how do you look at a Nick Bonito or a Jonathan Cooper or a Zach Allen or even a Bo Nix and say, great year, overperformed. This is outstanding. And now we need you to at least do it again. That's a different thing. And so there's a slight where I think when people say like maybe the Broncos don't deserve to be in there, it feels like they have a handful of guys that played out of their minds and it might've been just enough to lift them into the 7th seed, but they're not going to do that every year. So for the Broncos, what's the danger in making the assumption that Nick Bonito is now going to be a top 3 sack guy in the league every year for the rest of his career?
Especially if they lose Vance Joseph. He's going to interview for multiple head coaching jobs, and they could lose him. And he's a big piece of that puzzle, how the players respond to him. I would say this, because you're right. If 6 or 7 have career years, the idea they're going to back that up is very unlikely statistically in any sport, let alone just specific to this team in this discussion about the Broncos. How do you then prepare for that? You get better players on offense. You create more margin for error. They have no tight end. They have no real threat. They haven't had a 100-yard rusher since Sean Payton took over. So you get a better running back tandem or a clear one. You go get a tight end and you go get T. Higgins, a number 1 receiver. So if some of these guys backpedal and they're not as good, well, you just bought players that are really good. Let's say Tyler Warren or the kid Loveland from Michigan or Harold Fanning or Taylor from LSU. Now they're good and they help keep that, keep you still balanced, because some of these guys won't be good, but they're still young enough to where you could say, like in Benito's case, he's ascending. Zach Allen is not an old player. That's why I still think this window for them, Sean, it's open right now for a few years, especially if you look at their defensive core and how they're doing it. But how do you prepare that this could be a fallback next year? Is you get better players offensively, for me. And then now you can win games in multiple ways, because obviously it felt like the defense dragged them along at times. And then at the end of the year, though, since week 11, the offense has averaged 32 points a game. The offense has done its job. So, but I do think the way you prepare is you're not dealing with $91 million in dead cap space this offseason. You got some money to spend.
Will be immensely helpful.
You're dealing with essentially 35-ish. So you've got money to spend and spend it wisely to add to this group. And I think that's how they take it to the next level and assure that they're kind of this force to be reckoned with for the next 3, 4, 5 years.
Well, the Broncos will go to Buffalo. Obviously, Buffalo in January, it's always tough. You talk about the margin for error and being able to win games in multiple fashions. Well, the Bills can do that. We've seen that. The Broncos yesterday had Bo Nix lead the team in rushing, and he's done that a couple times. By and large, that hasn't been good for his passing performances, but against kind of mostly second stringers against the Chiefs, it was fine. But without Bo Nix, the running backs alone had 115 yards and a touchdown. You're thinking, that's good. But it was on 36 carries, just barely over 3 yards a carry. And that's against, again, a bunch of second string Chiefs. So the running game still for the Broncos feels like it still feels like an afterthought. And even when you have that many carries in a game, because the game got out of hand and everyone just wanted to get home and get back in one piece, but that running game still feels like an afterthought, even though at times it feels like there is better talent there. And maybe you and I are projecting when we talk about Audric Estime or the potential of a change of backpack like Julian McLaughlin. But this probably isn't going to get changed on Sunday. The question I would have for you is, based on what we've seen since Sean Payton came into town, as you point out, not a single 100-yard rusher, is this really a priority for the Broncos, or is this just kind of what you're going to expect with the Sean Payton team for as long as Sean Payton's coaching?
I mean, this is who he is. He loves the pass, and he trusts Bo Nix. I think he's leaned on him too much. We talked about last week. I mean, he's 6th in dropbacks in the NFL. That's a lot for a rookie. And second among rookies to Caleb Williams. And the difference is Bo doesn't take sacks. Caleb Williams, I mean, I hope it doesn't stun his growth for a couple of years because the number of sacks he took. But it just, I gave it up a few weeks ago that they're just not going to run the football. It's not who Peyton is. So it goes back. I narrow the focus and say they just to be able to run in some instances. The problem is when it's not your identity, and you ask linemen, and I know a lot of them that have played, it's just when you ask them to go backward 40 times, and then, okay, game on the line, 3rd and 1, 44-yard line, need a first down. They haven't established the bully identity for 3.5 quarters. Now you're saying, well, now go do it. Now go do it. And it's just not who they are. So, again, somehow they have to find that balance. I agree with you this Sunday because they're not going to suddenly reinvent themselves and run the ball 50 times. It's not who they are. But they got to be able to run enough to where Bo isn't throwing 50 times. They've got to think in terms of him throwing, 30 to 35 times on the road. And the way to do that is, and you brought it up, the way to do this and the kind of the workaround, if you will, the hack, is that Bo Nix rushes 8 times for 62 yards. That is this week, not long term, but this week, the workaround for me is Bo Nix is a guy who runs 8 times for 60 yards. And one of those is, 28 yards that sets up a touchdown type run. That's how you can look at the numbers at the end and say they had some semblance of balance. And also, there was enough of a threat of him in the RPO that it was creating openings behind linebackers on crossing routes because they were worried about Bo running the football. That would be my solution, because me sitting here saying, man, what would it look like if they gave the ball to estimate 20 times? It's not going to happen. So I'm not even going to bring it up because it's not happening. So how about Bo Nix runs 8 to 10 times and they overall end up running, they're throwing 36 times and running 32. Like, that's to me how you could beat Buffalo.
I mean, Nix may indeed be the hack, because I went back and looked at the Super Bowl season 2009 when the Saints won under Sean Payton. That team ran for 2,106 yards. They were led by Pierre Thomas, who had 793. Mike Bell had 654. And Reggie Bush had 390 yards at that point. So they kind of did it by committee again. And they scored 34 touchdowns on the ground. Even though it's been ugly, this Broncos team has 1,908 yards on the ground, only 200 short of that championship Saints team, and 30 touchdowns on the ground as opposed to the 34. So, I mean, when you're talking about some of these scenarios that are 30 touchdowns offensively. So, I mean, when you're talking about some of these comparisons, this is very much Sean Payton. And it's been Sean Payton when he's won. It's been Sean Payton when he's lost. But maybe because Bo Nix is the Broncos' 3rd leading rusher, and of course Drew Brees only ran for 30 yards in total in that 2009 season, maybe that is the way it works. Maybe it could be functional, but it just looks vastly different. The challenge, of course, is the same that the Ravens have dealt with, that the Bills have dealt with, and rules changes have helped. But the quarterbacks, you expose them to too many hits, and you certainly risk your whole season going up in flames.
Yeah, and I'll give Nix credit. As a rookie, he's shown an ability to get out of bounds. It's not so much the sliding; he just gets out of bounds. I can't remember, and I it's been a long year. I can't remember one big hit he took while running the football. He's taken a few on sacks, but he's so fast that he gets his shoulders and stuff where you're kind of bouncing up, and he's not taking a lot of direct hits, and he has slid when he needs to. So I believe, again, against Buffalo, their defense has struggled, honestly, too. The last 3 or 4 weeks of the season, they have some issues, too, now. I'm not saying the Broncos are winning this game, but they have a puncher's stance. It's just Josh Allen plays out of his mind in the playoffs, particularly this round. So it's really going to come down to that. This is why you and I bring up the run. Is part of the way you control great quarterbacks is playing keep away. And so you could do that by passing the football. That's a lot to ask Bo Nix to, go on the road and go 29 for 4-2 for 305 and no turnovers. That's just really difficult to do in Buffalo on the road in January, where you're like, man, could you go 24 for 32 and one of your running backs throws out 115 yards? That's a more easy formula to see as a route, but not for this team. It just isn't. So, again, can Nix, I think they're going to be aggressive with Nix on the ground. I just do. That's one thing they haven't shown a lot of lately, and I do think he was dealing with an injury or the back or whatever. I think that's, again, one of their secret things. Like, well, if you want to run Josh Allen and he's going to run wild, well, we got our guy too, and maybe that's how you try to counter. And Allen, I know he hasn't this year, but he still has a history of turning the ball over. So if you're the Broncos, you've got to think in terms of longer drives, sustained drives, and you've got to get strip sacks. And if you look at, this is one of the best matchups of the playoffs, Sean. You're talking about the team that led the league in sacks with 63, and the offensive line that gave up the fewest with 14. So I would gather that the team that wins the sack differential in this game is going to win the game.
The last one for you here, Troy. Is Marvin Mims now something of an X factor? The Broncos have found a way to now make him a regular functional part of the offense as a receiver. Didn't run yesterday. All six of his touchdowns this season have come in the last 7 games. Now that you have a legitimate deep threat, he doesn't maybe help you so much with the lengthier drives, but if you can get one over the top and score, that's a difference maker. How different has the offense looked to you in the last month now that Mims has been able to be established as an integral part of the offense?
It just gives them this kind of catalytic force. Before, it felt like if Bo and Cortland Sutton weren't connecting, no chance. Now, there goes stretches where Sutton's not involved, and you feel like, man, maybe Nix is going to make a play. Or excuse me, maybe Mims is going to make a play. And these last few weeks, he's got 4 touchdowns. He can get behind the defense. He's a guy who can legitimately change a game with one play. He ran so fast on that first touchdown, his name fell off the back of his jersey. I mean, I said in my column today at the Denver Post, and shameless plug, you can read it there, that he reminds me of like this combination of Rick Upchurch and Eddie Royal. Like, he's becoming a player. He's becoming an Royal was a way more used receiver, but I see signs of that. Like, man, he gets behind a defense, he can have the 3 for 103 yards. Like, he can have a game like that. And to your point, he's going to have one big play Sunday if they're going to win. There's no way they walk out of Buffalo if he doesn't have one big play. And it might be a 50-yard return. It might be a 50-yard reception. But I don't see how they could upset Buffalo if he doesn't have at least one explosive splash play.
Well, we'll get a chance to talk about this again on Friday prior to the game. Of course, as Troy pointed out, check out everything he's putting together in the Denver Post and the Broncos podcast with Troy Renck. Any sneak peeks of your plan this week?
Yeah, I mean, I broke down what this meant on the podcast about how, please stop telling me how they didn't deserve to get in. Yeah, anyone who's watched Broncos football the last 8 years, missed me with that. It just tells me you haven't watched the Broncos for the last 8 years. It's only taken 5 coaches and 13 quarterbacks. So enough. You need not apologize. So that's number one. And I talked a little bit about, this defense with 63 sacks and then get into the idea of the Bills. But when I look at the weekend on Friday, I want to get into the idea of Bo Nix finally changing the history of them not drafting Josh Allen. That hung over the franchise for how many years now of, oh my God, if they'd only left, they finally aren't talking in those terms because of Bo Nix and part of ownership. You know this, you follow as closely as anyone. Part of their issues during this dramatic spiral they had for 8 years, absentee ownership, especially the end of those last 3-4 years. And so it just feels like now the Broncos are back in the playoffs where they belong because they have stable ownership with deep pockets, deeper than ever, Pat Bowlen. But it feels like they've kind of got their next Pat Bowlen in ownership. They've got a coach with a proven pedigree, and they've got the quarterback. Well, when you have those 3 things going, typically you have a shot. So I want to look at that and kind of examine, too, and more specifically, how Bo Nix in his season has soothed the pain of not drafting Wyoming's own Josh Allen.
Well, it's been a long time since the Denver Broncos have been in the playoffs, the longest of any team, the longest playoff drought for a team that won the Super Bowl and took that long to get back, but it is over. You'll want to follow Troy on the Denver Post for all the latest and check out that Broncos podcast with Troy Renck for more as well. Always great to get to hear that. And as we said, very proud of that to be part of the Mile High Sports Network. Troy, thanks so much. A busy week coming for all of us, but a fun week and one that, boy, I think we're happy to get the extra work. It's a lot more fun when you're with a team that's doing something interesting again. So thanks so much for the time. I know it's a busy day. We'll look forward to catching you later this week.
Yeah, a lot more fun than covering a coaching search. I will tell you that. So we're all good.
Yeah.
See you.
Thanks so much, Troy Renck, joining us. Exactly right. How about 5 coaches, 13 quarterbacks, finally over. The Denver Broncos are back into the playoffs for the first time since the 2015 season when they won in Super Bowl 50. We will spend all week, of course, focusing on this and breaking down the Broncos playoff appearance. They will go to Buffalo to face the Bills on Sunday morning. The odds will be long, but it is the NFL. It's any given Sunday. The Broncos will be looking to build to that. Cody Rourke joined us earlier. Will join us all week. Looking forward to talking more about Cody. He was the guy that said they'd win 10. Well, they win 10. So always good to talk to Cody. Nate Lundy, of course, joining us as well. We'll be there all week, and always good to talk to Troy Renck. So thanks so much for tuning into the program. We'll be back at it tomorrow. Danny Bailey's the man that makes it all work behind the camera. For everyone here at Mile High Sports, I'm Sean Drotar. Thanks. We'll catch you tomorrow right here on Mile High Sports.